Welcome back to the Justice Conference Asia 2015. I'm joined with Rachel Goble, who just shared an incredible message. You talked a lot about slavery and human trafficking, and actually it's gotten a lot of press recently.
Yeah.
But you said sometimes actually that coverage and really the misportrayal of it can actually be harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we have a tendency to want to categorize things into what is familiar, right? And so when we hear the words human trafficking, we instantly go into who is the predator and who is the victim. And we try to put these things in boxes and kind of depict one person as evil so we know who to go after, and the other person as innocent so we know who to protect. And I think what we're finding as human trafficking especially remains the hot topic, is that these depictions are more harmful because what's actually happening is so much more nuanced and layered under that. I think, there's a lot of research, for example, that's been done on kind of the word is not coming to me, but like the length of or the spectrum of abuse, and how more often than not when a woman or a girl or even a young man is trafficked, that usually it's not the first time that they're experiencing being a victim of abuse, and yet we still put them into these categories as though it's the first time. And so understanding that the historical narrative of that victimization and or the predator being able to prey upon the weak goes a lot further and a lot deeper than what we might be seeing on the surface.
Right. And you mentioned specifically a story of one young woman, and how that issue is a lot messier maybe than we really originally understood, right?
Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one young woman, her name is Mai, her name has been changed, but she essentially, she turned 13 years old and wanted to explore life. She's a beautiful young woman that grew up in a really tiny, small village with not a whole lot of activity. And I remember what I was like when I was 13, and I wanted to explore the world, and she did the same. And I think in a cultural context and in a place where she was very at risk of being trafficked, the area that we work in is known as a source area for traffickers. Girls end up in small karaoke bars, brothels, the red light districts, you name it. And so there is unfortunately a large demand for girls like Mai, where traffickers are able to recognize that they can prey upon her vulnerabilities and her desire to want to see something different in the world. And so her story was very... it was complicated, and even as an organization that works in anti-trafficking work, we're primarily focused on prevention, but to have a story with one of our girls who we've seen and we've seen her grow up over the years, be trafficked, but then have that tension between, technically she's underage and so she falls under the trafficking victims protection laws, but at the same time, in some ways, she was making a choice to go towards that and not away from that.
Right, and you mentioned also just about how we talk about slavery versus freedom,
right.
But really it's not quite that clean, right? And
right.
it's a lot more messy than that. And so in some ways, you talked about how her freedom actually in a way needed to be taken away in a sense, so that because she didn't have maybe the mother or the father in place to maybe teach her some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the cultural implications go very deep, and it's not, when you're working in anti-trafficking work, it's not about trying to build structures or even focus on rescue work or raids, but really looking at what are the systematic root issues that are driving this. And in Maya's case, I think one of those was that she was stuck in, there was a cycle of what I call the mother-daughter cycle of prostitution, where unfortunately had been normalized in her family, and that it was something that as you go in, you can't just say that Maya's the only one affected by this, but instead working within the entire family structure.
That's amazing. Well, thanks so much, Rachel, for being here at the Justice Conference. We can't wait to hear more.
Thank you.